Hey everybody, nice to see y'all tonight. I'm going to be doing a workshop with SGDA and HackUTD for the HackUTD Game Jam, focusing on pixel art for games. I'm going to go over a few different things tonight. The first thing I want to go over is color palettes, because that's one of the big things to developing a look and feel to pixel art for games. Then I'm going to go over some tricks for tile sets. And then I'm going to go over some basic principles for character art. And again, thank you to HackUTD for collaborating with us for this game jam. All right, so if you are following along anywhere, there's a few different things to prepare with. You're going to want to set up either one big canvas or a few smaller canvases. For my sake, I'm using 3 different smaller ones. So in this first window, I'm going to set up a color palette. In the second window, I'm going to go over some tile set stuff. You can see it's a little bit larger. This one is about 512 by 512 pixels. And in this third one, which is a little bit smaller again, 64 by 64, I'm going to be going over some basic character stuff. But yeah, this one for the palette is the smallest of all of them. And I'm going to go over some neat tricks that I use a lot for pixel art and also generally for digital and game art with color use. So to start off, we're going to want to be sure to have a pencil tool equipped. Real quick, that just allows us to draw lines that are actually completely pixelated. They don't have any blurring. They don't have any real wandering. I'm using just the standard brush. The one that it says is selected is soft round, but of course, since we're using the pencil tool, it's going to be a hard one. And yeah, let's start off from there. So I already have a background color set. One thing I like to do with background colors to ensure that I kind of actually set a mood for the palette is I'll pick a pretty dark and a pretty low saturation color that's very cool in hue. I like to have the coolest hue in my palette be somewhere around the 250 out of 360 mark, because it gives this kind of slightly retro, slightly almost Polaroid feel to the color scale in the pixel art. And then I'm setting up a new layer over this background layer that I have. And I'm going to start developing some colors. So what I like to do when I set out some of the initial color ramps, a color ramp being a sequence of colors that you create, is I like to start off with an actual mathematical approach to doing things. So I'll go to the value and I'll increase that by an even amount. Right now, the background color's value is 10. I'm taking it up to 20. I increase the saturation. So the current saturation is 15. I'm gonna, for now, take that to 25. And I'm gonna bring the hue warmer. And the way we're gonna do that, since it is currently this dark purplish blue, is we're actually gonna decrease the hue's value. And I'm gonna decrease that by a little bit more. I'm gonna take it from 250 to 230. And then we have the next color up from this very darkest dark color. And one thing that helps a lot is kind of progressing with those same increments for a while, getting progressively warmer as you get into those lighter colors. So I'm going to go from there to a value of 30, a saturation of 35, and a hue of 210. And you can see that there's this already forming very pleasant, very organic blue color ramp that can give us a good central feel to base our palette around as we move forward. So I'm gonna keep going through that really quick. We're getting to around 50 in value, which is where I like to actually start easing off the saturation again. So I'm gonna start decreasing saturation from 55 down to 45, but I'm going to keep increasing the value, and I'm going to keep shifting the hue towards warm to simulate warm light. And from there, you can get a pretty continuous setup going. I'm gonna just hit a few more of these points real quick, just following the same general pattern, decreasing the hue to get warmer, decreasing the saturation, and increasing the brightness. And here is what is basically the white for our color palette. And so we have this first color ramp existing that is going to provide a lot of fun space for doing art. There's a few different ways that you can build off of your initial color ramp. There's a few different approaches. The one that I like to do to kind of start off is to actually start off from the same core color, which is actually this like background color that is 1 pixel below what looks like the lowest color on this ramp. And I slide the hue by a different increment, which will create a different feeling effect. And one really cool thing you can do is you can actually select this layer, copy it, paste it, go to edit, transform, rotate 90-degree clockwise, and use this as a template. And since you have those hue and saturation and value changes baked in, you can alter the color without changing anything but the hue. There's a few different ways to do this. If you wanted to, you could actually just go into hue and saturation and mess around with that. There's some pretty satisfying options there. But what I want to do is actually have them regress into that same darkest color at the center. And so I'm going to go in and do that manually. So you can see right now, for this first color ramp, the hue is changing by an increment of 20 every time. I'm going to go in there and this time change it by 30 just to start exploring with a different feel. So instead of this one being 230 hue, it's going to be 220 hue. And then instead of 210, it's going to be 190. And we're going to keep on progressing in that direction for a little bit. Just grabbing the color from everything and then changing only the hue value. And one thing you kind of start running into as you get towards the very top of the palette is we're actually getting close to about as warm as colors feel. Once you start getting to 40, 30, or 20 in hue, it actually starts feeling a little bit less bright, a little bit less sunlit, just because it loses that amber tone. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start at this very pleasant green mid-tone, that natural feeling one. And instead of doing the full 30 increment, I'm going to start decreasing that. And that's something you can do at any point as you create a palette. If any jumps feel extreme or just don't feel natural, you can kind of start looking at why is that? What can you do to get them to feel pleasant, to feel appropriate, if that makes sense, and tweak from there. So instead of keeping that increment of 30, I'm going to start gradually decreasing that. So this one is going to be 20, and then probably 15 is probably a good one. I think that'll end up still being noticeable, but at the same time being pleasant, feeling organic, feeling fresh. and then down to probably 10. That feels nice. And for this last one, it's low in saturation, but 10 feels nice. And so you can see we have this, like, you know, two different ramps that have slightly different feel. And that's one way of handling different colors. But as you can see, depending on the increments, you might get a like more or less intense slide. There's another method that can be really fun to work with. I'm going to set up another ramp for that real quick. And that's actually starting off with your mid-tone color, which for the sake of this, I'm going to say is this one here, this green that is kind of central to the palette, which, like, you know, everything else is kind of feels based off of. I know the one below it is actually a tiny bit more vibrant, but this is kind of in the central space. And we can actually go and change the hue of that to whatever we want and work with the other ones from there. And so I think a good place to start with this would be like a kind of like warm red. With reds, they actually feel a little bit less saturated than green, so I'm going to probably bring that up to like 65-ish. And then we can kind of build those same hue shifts, those saturation shifts, those value shifts off of that central color. So we're going to have to make some tweaks to saturation, just because we had to change the saturation to get that kind of central color feeling in a good space. I'm gonna keep doing increases of, one increase of 10 to reach this one, but then after that, you know, decreasing from the kind of high point of saturation at around 50 value. And so we'll probably want to like keep around the same amount of hue shifting on this red tone to keep it feeling pleasant with the other colors in the palette. And we're going to have to keep tweaking saturation, of course, since we tweaked it for that central color. But I'm going to keep following the same general approach to the amount of shift in hue and the amount of shift in value and brightness. So right now, this last one we edited is at 325 hue. Since I'm keeping the same shift of 20 hue, the next one is going to be only at 305. As the color gets darker, we're shifting it a bit colder. You can see the bottom half of that color ramp is actually starting to feel really pleasant. Like, it's vibrant, but at the same time, it's like not garish. It's not like using some really intense, like, symbolic color, kind of like how a lot of people have an instinct if they want to put red in their game to just grab the reddest red there is, and you get that really jarring effect that is like very digital, very non-organic looking. And so we're going to just keep on editing this ramp. And again, as we're in this like really warm color space, a pretty slight shift in hue is going to have a lot of an effect. So I'm actually going to have that hue shift be a little bit less intense as we move on. And I'm, tweaking some values to just make sure that we are keeping with those increments. So from this high point of 65 saturation, we're not like ever going to keep going past that as we go into the lighter colors. We want the lighter colors to be less saturated. All right. You can see we're starting to get some really pleasant colors to use in our art. I'm gonna keep going from here for a little bit. As if you haven't been able to tell already, this is probably going to be a pretty relaxing workshop. There's, you know, not necessarily too much rushing. There's not necessarily too much like deep problem solving. A lot of it is like developing good practices, developing like ways to think about what you want to include in your design. And so I'm just gonna like, be here and kind of open that window into how I work with stuff. All right, I'm gonna open up another um, ramp real quick. You can see we've got this like really pleasant teal ramp. We've got this really pleasant like more green one. We've got this red one. I think I'm gonna go with like one that's a bit more of a traditional like cool blue next. And I'm also gonna have that going off the center to start off with. And then same practice, I'm gonna start off from the midtone for this one. I feel like that's a good direction to go with this. And I'm gonna try out the same general amount of shift, like the 20 hue shift per moved color, if that makes sense. The 20 hue shift per 10 value shift. I'm actually starting to feel like that 20 is a little bit intense. It makes these like brighter colors start feeling a little less natural. So I'm gonna actually go a little bit less intense. I'm gonna try out a 15 at first. So instead of 170, this next one is gonna be 175. Instead of 150, this next one is gonna be 160. And these changes, like, as they start off, they feel super subtle, but they build up and build up. So as you start getting towards the other end of the ramp, you can see the changes start becoming more and more extreme. And that's actually feeling a lot better. That feels pleasant. And so I'm going to keep the same hue shifting approach on the other side. So I'm going to go from 190. I'm going to add 15 to make that a little bit cooler. That'll become 205. And then this next one is going to be 220. This next one is going to be 235. This last one is going to be 250, which, is actually the same hue as the very darkest color, but since the very darkest color is so unsaturated and so dark, it doesn't feel jarring. Like, it doesn't feel weird, this transition between the two. And then with palettes, there's actually a lot of places to go if you want to like include anything specific. Say you want to like portray some fire in your art, you can start approaching some ways to some like specific areas of the palette that you want to build. Real quick, I'm just going to merge all of these into the same layer. I'm not really planning on moving any of these individual branches around anymore. I'm planning on building off of this solid core that we have. And so if you wanted to like have something very vibrant, very like attention drawing like fire, you'll probably want to actually build up on saturation some more. And the big way I'm going to show that personally is by having a big shift between hues, a big shift in saturation. I'm actually going to start building a little more saturation as we get brighter. So I'm going to start off from right here, this kind of maroon color, which is a good like darkest color. for that section of the palette. And I'm gonna, I think, increase value by 20 per increment. That's probably a pretty fun approach. Increase saturation by 10. Increase brightness by probably like 15 is a good amount. Yeah, that actually doesn't feel bad. Might increase saturation by a little bit less. I might only increase it by like 8, which again doesn't look like a very big change now, but that'll like build up as we do more and more steps on this color ramp, because every time you pick like how much you're adjusting a value by, it builds up over time. You get that increasing effect. All right. And I'm actually keeping building up. I might actually be a little bit subtler with some of these value changes at first. I might take it from like the 2520 it is right now to maybe like a continuous 18. I think that could be fun. So the brightness on this is 68 now instead of 70. And then for the next one, instead of the like very high 95 it is, I'm going to make that, doing math in my head right now, I'm a little bit tired, but that'll be 86. And I might have a slightly subtler change in hue for that specific one. I think this is an area where I might just, intentionally tweak it. But otherwise, I'm gonna keep the general increments going on. We're gonna have to decrease a little bit as we get towards the top of the brightness scale, because I can't have an 104 brightness, but I'm gonna probably go straight to 100 for brightness for the next step. I'm gonna increase hue again, probably 35, and I'm gonna start decreasing brightness by that same increment. As you start getting to like extreme sides of the scale, there gets to be a lot of fudging, if that makes sense, because you're working with kind of the ends of the scale. You have to compensate with, if you run out of brightness to increase, you have to start decreasing saturation a little bit more. If you run out of saturation to increase, you'll probably have to like decrease brightness. But yeah, you can see this shift isn't as intense as you would expect it to be, just because we ran out of brightness to increase. And so I'm gonna do an example of that. I'm gonna compensate and decrease the saturation a little bit more. And that starts feeling better. I'm probably gonna leave the saturation for that one at around 50. Yeah, that's a nice little branched area. Sometimes you might want to like have more intermediate tones between colors. There's a few ways of doing that. They're both relatively easy. The one that I usually do, just for simplicity's sake, is I'll kind of have an intermediary space. I'll draw one color and then I'll set the brush opacity to 50 and just get those like perfect even increments. And that'll mean like, your values will look a little bit weird. They won't be nice round numbers, but it's fast, it's like effective, and it usually looks pretty good. All right. One place I'm gonna go from here is I'm gonna actually copy off one of these branches and add a neutral branch. I'm gonna rotate that. And the big way to do that is to just, from the very top, which is already very desaturated, you're going to just want to increase the saturation by much smaller increments. Usually, even for a neutral tone, you'll want to like have some saturation because otherwise it feels, again, very inorganic, very clinical. But you'll want to have some like very small changes still. So I'm probably only gonna go with around 5 per step here. So instead of 15, the saturation on this is 10. And then instead of 25, 15. And you see, like, again, as we're moving down this ramp, the changes get more and more noticeable. For that one, I actually just input 15 instead of 20 on accident. This next one is going to be 25. This most saturated one is going to be 30. And then we're going to start decreasing saturation again. And then for the neutral tone, I'll also probably bring these hues a little bit closer towards the blue end. The way I'm going to do that is just have larger hue shifts between these steps. Which again, like, as we have lower saturation, the hue shifts aren't going to feel as intense as they do in, say, this ramp over here or this ramp over here. So I'm doing increments of 20 right now. And that's actually, this is a nice branch, but it's not necessarily like great for grays. It still actually builds up a little bit more saturation at the center than we would want if we were like drawing a typical stone, which you can like actually test really, really quickly. You can see it like, you know, it's not unpleasant, but it's still a little bit vibrant. It's still a little bit on the whimsical side. So if you wanted to like have a slightly more neutral color space available to you, you can build another branch off of that that doesn't have quite as much saturation to it. I'm gonna bring the hue on this very lowest one down to 10, and I'm only gonna increment saturation by 3 for this very most neutral ramp. Again, I'm just, copying an existing branch and rotating it with the transform. And then we start, again, decreasing in saturation as we get past this midpoint in value. And that's a really, really nice neutral gray. If we wanted to, like, test out drawing something gray like a rock with that. I don't know why my example of a gray thing is just rocks right now. You know, nothing wrong with a good old rock every now and then. It feels like very pleasant, very like real, if that makes sense. It feels natural. Sorry, just checking the presentation chat real quick. There will be an opportunity for a Q&A at the end of this. I should mention on stream in case uh, my fellow officers haven't mentioned that in the chat at all. But yeah, I'll be available for a little bit after we walk through some of this process stuff. And then this actually covers a lot of really good space in terms of a color palette already. It's limited, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It gives you a fun paint box to play with. It gives you a lot of very compelling colors to work with. Some colors that are actually pretty well related to each other. You can see as we start layering them, some things that play nicely together and feel kind of like they live in that same world. The last thing I'm probably going to build off of this is basically a less saturated and slightly less intensely hue shifted version of this red branch to get some neutral brown colors going on. So I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna rotate it. Checking. Okay. Nothing important. And then we're gonna start manually adjusting some of that stuff. So for some nice pleasant brown colors, like if you're doing tree bark or wood or a house or anything like that, I like it to still be relatively vibrant, but it doesn't have to be as vibrant as this red color ramp is. And so I'm gonna, instead of a interval of 20, I'm gonna have an interval of 15 for the saturation shift. I feel like that'll put us in a pretty good space. I'm gonna actually probably, that first one was a shift of 15 because we hit the value maximum, but I might actually take the rest of it down to a 10. For a second, I thought I accidentally drew off screen because of a mouse misclick, but I don't think I did. And again, it doesn't necessarily look brown right now, but that's because we haven't actually gone in and messed with the hue at all yet. We're only touched the saturation. One really sad thing is that a lot of the resources that I learned this from have actually kind of started to disappear off of the internet. There was this really cool blog asset called Purple Pony with pony spelled like pone, if you're talking in some MMO chat circa 2008. But sometimes I can access it. Most of the time if I go there, it's just a redirect error. And so it is rough seeing some of those assets disappear from the world. And so hopefully as people pick this up, a little bit of that is going to be preserved. All right. So for this brown ramp, I'm gonna take this hue shifting and have a like slightly less intense amount of it. Right now the interval is 10. I might take that down to 7 is probably a good spot. I'm gonna have to kind of feel it out. It's one of those like very fine changes that makes a big difference. But again, those little differences add up and make a really big difference in how stuff feels as you go through them. Yeah, this is actually starting to feel really pleasant. Might actually start desaturating a little bit at this point, but I'll go through all of the hue changes first to see if that ends up being something that's desirable or if it feels like it's in a good spot. All right. This is silly, but I'm just gonna draw like a really quick and easy, like fallen branch or a log or something to see how, like, again, this color feels in practice. And my instinct right now is that it's actually feeling like pretty pleasant. I think it's like starting to be in a nice space. Gonna test some of those like slightly more saturated colors. Yeah, this specific one is kind of standing out a little bit, this like most vibrant part of that ramp. And so I'm gonna do real quick is I'm just gonna hand adjust this one to be a bit less saturated. Not even necessarily gonna have a like sound mathematic way of doing that. I'm just gonna manually tweak that one value. And that feels more pleasant. That feels like really nice. Yeah. Okay. And I think that's actually a really nice place for the palette itself. I feel like we have access to a lot of the like fun, like pleasant environmental colors we'll want to have access to. And so for this next segment, I'm going to go over some details about building a pixelated tile set. All right. So again, this image is a lot larger. It's 512 by 512. And sorry, just checking in real quick about how there have been some issues with my webcam's autofocus. It can be a little bit finicky. I apologize for that. I don't necessarily have a good way of controlling it. But yeah, I figure a good place to start off would be a 16 by 16 tile set. It's a small amount of pixels to work with, a little bit excessive right now for our purposes. Right. So yeah, this is a pretty good amount of space for a tile set. So you can make a tile set of basically any environmental feature for a pixel art game. You know, it will depend on what is in your game. It'll depend on what you want to like have in your environments. But I'm probably gonna stick with dirt to start off here because dirt is like going to be really common in games. You can do a lot of like fun features with it. You can have grass on top of it. You can have like all of that space, it is like there's a bunch of different ways to draw it. There's a bunch of different ways to think about it. And so I'm gonna work from that. As you can see, I'm just kind of tabbing back over to the palette every now and then. If I wanted to like formalize things super well, you could actually start incorporating these colors into a palette in Photoshop. But usually, if it's like a short project that I'm doing, I'll just actually build the palette in real space and just color pick with like alt click from anything I want on it, because it's quick, it's easy, and it kind of keeps me mindful of the relationships between all of these colors on these ramps. It reminds me like what's attached to what is a good place to branch out from any point. And so we're over here with our like first kind of central dirt tile. I'm gonna start like just giving it a little bit of like a dirt clump pattern real quick. You can kind of just feel this out. There's some like ways you can like be kind of methodical about it. There's some ways you can be like a little bit intense, but to be honest, usually I just kind of start throwing shapes together if I'm working with something like this that is like in nature a little bit random. And usually that like feels pretty good. And one thing, oh, I put this on the wrong layer. It's just a silly layer management thing. I'm gonna move that to its own layer and fill the little gap behind it in. And so this is like a pleasant, very simple dirt tile in and of its own. I'm probably gonna like take a second, add one more step of light into it, one more step of detail. I feel like that'll help it feel nice. Just take everything down by, you know, one step on the ramp in terms of color, make it a little bit darker, and then grab the former lightest color and use that for like adding a little bit of depth to these dirt clumps, making them feel good, making sure like for the sake of this, you're not necessarily going to have a lot of space for lighting, but I like to, you know, kind of figure out where that light is. I'm figuring it's coming from the top left right now, and since these protrude a little bit, the lighting is going to like hit the top left of each little clump of dirt. And so yeah, gonna just like go around, fill in a little bit of detail, start breaking up some of the like hard square edges that make it feel a little bit like too perfect, a little bit too like continuous. Start and this is totally personal taste, but sometimes I'll start like connecting spaces between some of these features. I feel like it can, from a distance, kind of help it feel like layered, help it feel like involved. And so that's a like pleasant starting dirt tile. That's got some appeal to it. From a distance, it looks good. But one thing you'll notice as I copy and paste it is even though I've been a little bit mindful about making sure that it is like something that should tile pretty okay, is that it doesn't really tile perfectly. I actually was probably, for the sake of illustrating this, a little bit too mindful about making sure that things looked good. But one trick, if you have something that you are tiling that doesn't tile well. Like if you start working on a tile set and something just doesn't look super good next to itself, is you can actually uh, take this mathematical trick where you grab the four quarters of it and you flip their positions. So you take the top left and you'll move it to the bottom right. You take the bottom right and you move it to the top left. So you swap those two. And then you take the top right and you move it to the bottom left. You take the bottom left and you move it to the top right. And you swap those two. And then this already looks pretty good, but for the sake of illustrating, you can, like, if there is any jankiness, kind of spend a little bit of time, quote unquote, like repairing the center of it, making it feel better. And as long as you leave those edges around it alone, it should tile just about perfectly. It should feel very, like, pleasant when you tile it with itself. And so as I get rid of this guide layout real quick, you can see that is a very pleasant, very, like, organic feeling dirt pattern. I'm gonna check chat real quick because I'm getting Discord notice from somewhere, but okay, it's from something else, so I don't think it's anything to worry about right now. All right. And then as you start building a tile set, depending on the structure of your game, like, you know, if it's very, very simple, you might only want one dirt square that you can make, like, a very simple square grid map made out of. But if you want a slightly nicer environment, you might want to, like, have some features. You might want to have, you know, some variations that you can do. And so one thing I like to do is I like to make a 3x3 square to start off with. And I'll just go around and make some of these be corner pieces. I'll have them have these corners rounded a little bit. This is a personal style element for me. Like, you know, not everyone necessarily does this, but it's something that's pleasant. If you're going for something that feels slightly more, like, realistic, slightly more detailed, you can even kind of go between some of these clumps and erase out details so that it has that kind of, like, craggly surface. That is something that, like, can be really pleasant depending on the feel that you're going for. And for the sake of illustration, I might just go through and do that real quick. And you can see as I clear this guide layout, I'll probably, like, go in and, you know, manually edit the bottom of it a little bit, make it, you know, feel a little bit more kind of rough and open at the very bottom of it. Might even just take the highlights off of these segments for the sake of having that, like, feel appropriate, having it feel like it would if it was the, like, underside of, like, a floating piece of dirt. And yeah, that feels really pleasant. That looks very nice. Just checking some notifications again and again. I don't think it's related to this stream, so I'm going to keep going for a little bit. Then I get that guide layout up again. One really nice thing about Photoshop for this specifically is it'll memorize the last layout you created. And so as long as you don't go around and mess with those numbers, you can get rid of the guides and replace them. And it should go pretty good. All right. One thing I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to just put some grass on top of this so that we can have a variant that, like, does have grass on it. And one nice thing, since we were pretty mindful while creating the color palette, is that you don't necessarily have to be too worried about making sure that the colors go well together. They'll just already feel pretty nice together depending on your approach. They'll have that kind of, like, not necessarily like complementary nature, but they'll feel like they were created with the same type of logic. They'll feel like they were created with the same core ideas. And so I'm going in, kind of freehanding um, the grass cover for this section at first. It feels pleasant. One thing to be mindful of with tile sets is that, if you're placing individual parts, you might have a section where it's like one of these far left ones and one of these far right ones, but without the center one between them. So you'll want to take a look at them. That doesn't actually look super weird, but depending on how intense the gaps are, you might want to like ease that up a little bit so that you're not going to have a huge like 8 or 9 pixel leap in something that you would expect to be like super flat and smooth. And so I'm going to just put in a couple of gentle tweaks there to make that feel like more cohesive, make it feel slightly more gentle. One thing that can be a big note with pixel art is that sometimes you'll see like some patterns emerging where the same shape repeats multiple times really closely. You can see it kind of here with these two triangles. And if this was like an object that was meant to be kind of on a repeating increment, I would be totally fine with that. But since this is grass, which should feel like random, you should almost not want to catch it tiling. You might want to go in and manually like repair some of those repeating things so that they don't look jarring, so they don't kind of catch your eye as you build stuff from them. And this is already looking really good. I might go for like one color darker on the base of this grass and then go in and grab the same color I was blocking it out with. And again, really quickly just light it. Have some of these like brighter value colors. I'm not with stuff like this always super intense about realism. A lot of it is about, selling the idea of this thing being here, like getting it to look pleasant, getting it to have some appeal. And then the rest will usually take care of itself pretty okay. But yeah. And again, I'm going to go in, make sure I don't have any like really super square edges because that's always jarring in like something like that. That's always like something that feels a little bit out of place if you have something that's like scraggly and organic, like grass is. And yeah, that feels really, really pleasant. I'm gonna go in with just like one more lighter shade and add some like tiny little highlights. Don't want to be too intense with it. Even just like, have some semi-random spacing on stuff. Get a couple like tiny little clusters and spaces where they might look good. A cluster is just a term that is used in pixel art to refer to like a little group of one color. They'll like help define implied forms. They'll help to like create the impression of there being like a shape that's in something. Like you can see we use clusters here to define the clumps in this dirt, and we create like relationships between different parts of it with that. So you can tell like these clumps are connected because of this big like dark brown cluster. Yeah. Again, this like might not be the right grass for everything, depending on like the style you're going for. But for the sake of like a quick environmental feature for a game jam game. It's like pleasant, it's arcadey, it like just feels really, really nice. It's like almost the like Sonic Green Hill effect where like, yeah, I know what prototypical like grass under looks like and that's it. It is like something that is credible is what it is. All right. And that's a lot of the tile set tricks that I'm gonna go over. You can always get more advanced with it. Like, let's say you wanted to, you know, have some inner corner shapes specified. You would be sure to like build those in your tile set so that they could all connect. Like, say if you wanted to like have even more functionality, you wanted to have, you know, a way to create a seemingly organic join between some of these forms. You could go for that. You could like set that up. Just, get some of those forms worked in. But I'm not going to go over that right now because I want to get onto some other stuff. I want to get onto some like props and characters tonight before opening things up to Q&A. And this is one space where like feel is very important. One thing I might actually check real quick. Hey, is there anyone on call right now that is like able to like check and see the chat that can pipe in real quick?
Yeah. I can
Awesome.
keep track of chat. So far there's not really much Q&A right now, but I'll let you know.
One thing that's silly is if anyone has an idea for like an object or a type of animal they'd like me to mock up real quick, I feel like that could be a fun way to get a little bit of like viewer engagement going on, and also just like a good way to show my thought process for drawing something I haven't necessarily drawn before. So if anyone in like the chat on Twitch or like
all right, we have a very excited Summer who wants a cat. Awesome. And several others are joining in, so I think a cat is
I can do a cat. Play. Yeah, that's pleasant. I'm gonna actually start looking at a reference picture for a cat. I'm not gonna put that up on my screen, but just like to start getting myself thinking about like what are some pleasant forms, like what are some pleasant ways to approach that. And sometimes depending, I'm also going to do this right now, but I'm going to look at like how people approach that stuff in pixel art. Because like I personally have my own style, but it's still really useful to start like looking at the ways other people represent ideas, to look at like what has appeal, what has been like tried and tested. And so one thing I'm going to start off with real quick is I'm going to like look at some of the color options. Personally, like me and my wife have a couple of black cats. Always been a big fan of them, so I think I might go that direction. Have a little bit of that like fun Halloween vibe. And what I like to do, which I know is silly, but like I actually like to start off very fast and loose. I like to just start like swinging my mouse around and messing with forms because it can actually get you in some like really interesting spaces. It can like get you thinking of some stuff in a way that you might not necessarily have before. And some of like my favorite things I've drawn have been things that I didn't necessarily know how to approach, but that like once I started blocking stuff out for, felt very natural to start working with and felt like very pleasant. And so yeah, you can see I'm kind of like working with some like very basic forms. I'm like getting some like I'm getting the general shape I want to approach with the head. I'm getting the general shape I want to approach with the body. I'm thinking like, where do I want to put the legs? Where do I want to put like the posture? Where do I want to put the like tail? And yeah. That's one thing that is like personally for me super indispensable with any kind of character art, whether it's like animals or like people, or even like a much more abstract character, a much more like you know, unusual subject like a robot, or like something that is like just a shape that also has personality, if that makes sense. And so I'm gonna just go around real quick, start refining these forms a little, start like tweaking, get into a space that feels like pleasant, you know? This is silly, but I'm letting one of our own cats, Jojo, who has like a very goblin-like physique, there's not really necessarily another way to put it, influence a lot of these choices. I think that that's a just really interesting space for this subject matter. It's fun. It like is interesting. All right. So now that I've got this like super blocked out form, I'm actually gonna go in and I'm gonna start laying out some colors, laying out like what I want the general shape to be like. I'm gonna go a little bit brighter for the like base color for the head. In fact, since I am drawing a black cat, depending, I might come back around later and like make the background color even darker, or like just a bright color from the palette to like, you know, maybe I want to move into a slightly darker color space. Maybe I want to be able to like have that accessible to me. But for now, I'm just going in, blocking some of these forms out, thinking about how the light would connect. Going around and like following some of those forms I laid out earlier, making sure to fill those in. It doesn't look like I'm really doing anything right now, but I am. Like I'm, you know, adding in those details on this layer, which is not just the block out. All right. I don't know how I missed those two little spots. I thought that I had gone over them, but I guess I hadn't. All right. And again, like everything with like any kind of art, there's a just like absolute billion ways to approach things. But I'm going for like some stuff that fits my personal style. I like to only really use like one step of lighting at most. That's always something that has like felt nice to me, has felt pleasant. I'm gonna go in, start like filling in some of these forms. You can see I decided kind of early on when I was doing lighting the idea of having this cat's head be turned to its right, our left. I think that's fun. I think it'll end up like making a pleasant composition. But again, like since I don't necessarily have a super specific idea in mind for what this is being used for, like I don't necessarily need to fill a ton of design challenges. I don't need to be like, this cat has a looking right animation that needs to be perfect for its special look right attack. So, yeah. Just kind of going in by feel. And I think this initial lighting pass is actually really nice. I'm gonna start going in and like adding in some details. I'm thinking of what to do for the ears. I might just kind of abstract it out a little, go with just like a lighter color, since, you know, it might not necessarily look right to go for like something we would understand as like, yeah, there's a little bit of skin shining through. Like that doesn't necessarily look bad. It doesn't necessarily look better. And for the sake of this, I might go for this approach because it's just like what looks pleasant to me. There's a lot of like subjective things you can get into with color choice. I'm also gonna consider real quick spacing out some of these forms a little bit more. It's always like something that's a little bit weird with pixel art. You have to kind of play with a give and take because, you know, you have to make a lot of use of symbolic representation. You don't always have access to the resolution to be accurate, and so you have to go a lot based off of how stuff feels. If it, you know, feels right in the moment, if it, you know, looks good in the place and the composition that it is. I'm kind of going back and forth a little on how to represent, like the fact that the paws extend out a little bit. I might even actually go in with that brown that I didn't use earlier and just like yeah, and again, not photorealistic, but there's something pleasant about it. There's something that, like, you know, especially from the distance, you would view something like this in game, creates that little bit of like an implication of detail without nailing super hard down like what it is, where it, or like what it has to be read as. It could be read as claws, it could be read as paw pads, but it definitely like brings in a little bit of a detail, a vague detail to that space that lets people read their own ideas into it. And then, to be honest, there's not necessarily too much more to do with this space except go in and tweak. And then I'm going to start going into some of those face details. There's a lot of different ways to do eyes. To be honest, part of me likes the idea of having just like this big, kind of haunting green space because that's very much the vibe of my cat personally. There's this like feeling sometimes where you'll wake up at night and you'll only see these blaring green lights in the darkness. And so if I wanted to represent that feeling very accurately, I might go with something like this. But, you know, you can always feel around. With eyes especially, there's a very limited amount of room in a lot of the compositions you'll work with. You can get huge changes in feeling with even the subtlest changes. As you can see, like, each of these permutations has a different emotionality to it, has a different, like, sense to it, feels like a different subject in some ways. There's not even necessarily a way to like guide y'all on that, except don't be afraid to experiment, don't be afraid to move stuff around, and you know, you'll probably run into something you like if you spend a little bit of time with it. I think what is speaking to me personally right now is something in this space. I feel like these two vertical lines with a little bit of offset from the nose has something pleasant to it. And yeah, can, go in and add details. If this was something that I was doing in my own style, I might actually stop around here. I feel like this is legible as a cat. It's something that, doesn't tell you too much, but it doesn't hide too much of itself either. But for the sake of demonstrating, I might add in, just a couple whiskers. That's always fun. Making them asymmetrical, making them a little bit weird is another way that you can add in some emotionality to it, kind of like you can with the eyes. I think that there's something really pleasant about this space. And again, all of this is personal taste. Legitimately, don't be afraid to mess around. Don't be afraid to explore. You'll run into something you like. In pixel art especially, even tiny little changes can be a super big deal. One thing I might actually do really quick is, since we have it ready, I might just give her something to sit on or create a little bit of grass. Nothing wrong with it. Yeah. I think that might actually be the only thing that I have super set out for y'all. I think I'll open it to Q&A now. And if y'all have any questions about process, any questions about if you have something in mind that you'd really want to explore how to draw, I would be totally happy going through that a little bit, going through how I would think about it. But yeah.
Summer's actually just curious what got you into pixel art originally.
This is silly, but what got me into pixel art was a rabbit hole where I had just got into game design 2 here, and I was experimenting with Game Maker, and Game Maker very much encourages that space. It encourages you to have a tile set. It encourages you to know the resolution of your room. And it was a pretty quiet semester for me. I was in my first semester of sophomore year, not necessarily having a lot. I think I only had 12 hours. And so I decided to go in and learn as much as I could from the environment in that class. Every time I made a game, every week, I would spend not necessarily a ton of time, but 4 or 5 hours just exploring the art space I wanted to be in with that weekly prototype for a game. I'd explore hey, what kind of subject matter would be fun to explore? What's pleasant? And I might actually go in real quick and open up. I still have one of my very first ever pieces of pixel art that I've kind of gone back and gone over some. But it's this pigeon that I don't know why it's named Tom, but it's named Tom. I was kind of tired, and it was 2 a.m. when I went through the process of making that pigeon, and I decided it should have a name. And it was just from this super simple jumping around platformer prototype that was my first ever Game Maker prototype. But I spent a lot of time and love going into where I wanted the character to look like. And then I realized, oh, this is something that's fun. This is something that I like doing. This is something that is a big open space to explore. And so I just kind of stuck with it and have been doing pixel art either for projects or in my free time for the last 3 or 4 years now.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah. We've got a question wanting to know your thoughts on anti-aliasing for pixel art.
Yeah, anti-aliasing, again, I don't necessarily have too much of an opinion on it. It's something that isn't an aspect of my style. I think it can look good. I think it can be pleasant. For reference, people might be a little bit confused about what that means. I'm just gonna draw a form right here. You can see if I wanted this shape to feel super smooth. The resolution is pretty low on it. It still feels jagged. You can still like really feel those right angle corners on it. And so if somebody wanted to like decrease that feeling of jaggedness, they might go in and experiment with having a darker color in some of those corner spaces, which can really help with that. And again, like the way I drew this shape isn't necessarily actually good technique. There's some like things I might get into in a second just because we have a bit of time for like how to draw lines well. But you can see as like I go in and have that darker color in some of those jagged corners, it starts to feel softer, especially from a distance. It starts to like kind of break up some of those sharp corners. It's something that, again, is like not an aspect of my personal style, but if it's something that like you like doing, if it's something that's not going to drive you crazy, and if it's something that you feel like looks good for your game style or your art style in general, like it is something that can bring in a little bit of that realism. It is something that's nice.
Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Do you ever like try using a tablet when doing pixel art, or do you generally stick to your mouse?
Personally, I stick to my mouse, but that's actually kind of bad habits. Like, I need to practice more using a drawing tablet, but I just haven't really had a good time to like get super used to it and put in the time. One funny thing is that it means that like I've actually gotten pretty comfortable drawing with my mouse. I can get like some of those free-forming motions in. Sometimes like I'll turn on the smooth tool if I need to like draw something super smooth. And so like I'm definitely not as hampered by not using a tablet as somebody who has not spent a lot of time using mouse would be. But it's something that like I definitely encourage. It's something that should make your life easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, cool. We got one person that's curious how you might go about doing large backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. I might actually go in real quick and go to some art stuff that I've done with pixel art in the past. There's these paints that I did just like in some free time between semesters that are like, still I go back to them and like, these are some fun large environments in low palette sizes. I think the biggest thing I can recommend with like doing large environments is that you are going to lose a lot of detail, especially if you're sticking to a low target resolution. And that's okay. It's not really something that you have to be afraid of. Work within the resolution of your game. Find out the general detail level you want to approach and just like feel it out, experiment. Don't try to necessarily get a ton of detail into a super small space because, you know, you can have really small forms that are still very evocative. I'm so proud personally of just this like tiny little camel on a tiny little post that's only like what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by 5 size for the camel itself, and it is still like inalienably, you know, it is what it is. Like it reads super well, and I think like that's kind of the space you have to get in. You have to think like if you're doing a super big environment and a small resolution, you have to think what aspects of this environment can I bring in that will be legible at a super small scale? Or like if there's something I have to include, what's the smallest scale that I can include it at? And you can kind of build up like, okay, how much of the environment can I show? How much of the like how much detail can I work in? There's a big like push and pull. Pixel art is definitely something that is restricted by its resolution. You're working within limits. But one thing that I love about it is that those limits get you thinking in unconventional ways, and they get you to really like build this very engaging and this very interesting way in thinking about what makes objects or symbols evocative, like what makes them interesting, where their appeal is hidden. And you can really like get to learning a lot from that. You can like build up an incredible amount of analysis of art and like what you like about a subject matter by engaging with it that way.
Cool. I think those are some pretty good tips. Someone else is asking how important it is to diversify your style, and if you might have any like tips for adapting to different styles.
Yeah. This is really funny. I'm actually working on something I cannot talk about, which is always rough, but it's something that I did have to diversify my style with. And I think in general, like that's something that'll be useful for any kind of artist. It's something that a lot of people have run into working with 3D art here, of course. Like there's so many different ways to represent stuff visually. And if you're like working for someone, or if you're working on a project where you want to explore a style that isn't necessarily yours, like that is something that you'll probably have to think about eventually. Like, I'm just messing around, like drawing like, a rock that is like, very much in my style. If I wanted to draw like a big boulder for an environment that like is not necessarily like super nailed down, that is not necessarily like super realistic, I might like work in a space like this. I might not want to get more realistic, but you'll like as an artist very often be working with people who have a vision for how they want stuff to look in their work. You'll be working with people who have like their own style in mind. You'll be working with like stuff that is outside of your comfort zone. And I think one of the biggest tips I can give for that is to just like start getting used to thinking about stuff that way. Start, looking at how other people tackle things. Start looking at, a variety of techniques. Start thinking about how people do their styles, even if it's not necessarily a style that you find appealing. Because like in general, that stuff is going to make you a stronger artist, whether or not you even necessarily act on it, whether or not you have to. It's always good to like think about how other people do what they do to, have a variety of techniques and a variety of ideas that you understand. Because even if you're only ever doing stuff in your own style, like even if you're like the creative director for every game that you ever work on and also the pixel artist in some like super small indie setup, you're going to learn stuff that will make your style better and stuff that'll make you a better artist by looking at how other people do things. One artist that has been like super influential for me, even though we don't necessarily have the same style, is a pixel artist who worked on Towerfall and Celeste named Pedro Medeiros, who has this wonderful comprehensive blog on Tumblr that I might actually make available to y'all in the SGDA chat, and maybe see about having someone share to the HackUTD chat, that just goes through a lot of like fun approaches for different types of ways to portray different subject matters in pixel art. So he'll have like an entry that's like ghosts or like rocks or something as broad as that, and just going through like a bunch of different tips and tricks that people have found out. And it's just really, really wonderful. It's like something that's been a huge inspiration, being able to look at how people approach different things, because that gets you thinking about like, how to problem solve in art so much better. And also just how to start thinking about how to approach things, how to analyze subject matter for stuff to do with it, I think that's probably where I would go with that. Working in a style that isn't your own can be challenging. Sometimes, like, I know how it is. Sometimes you'll be like, oh, I don't like this style, but I think it's a worthwhile practice. I think it's something that, like, has way more of a capability to be fun than it has a capability to suck.
Okay, cool. We got another question in. Actually, Summer shared the link, by the way. So
thank you so much.
So we've got that in the chat here and in the server as well. We've got a question. What are your thoughts on like certain peeves that people have? Things like staircasing or stray pixels when you're shading.
I know this is silly, but I've never necessarily been super strict on pet peeves. Like, I have an eye for them, like I can catch them. One thing that always gets people is like uneven line widths. Like if you just draw with a pencil tool, you can see there's this like awkward shapes that show up here where you have like an uneven line width where sometimes it's 2 pixels thick and sometimes it's 1 pixel thick. And so like usually if it's something like that is something I don't personally like doing, I'll correct it. I'll like go through and change how it looks. But I don't think that like there's necessarily a like quote unquote incorrect way to do art. I think it's something that the more you learn about it, the more you can develop what your style looks like. So you can see I like went through and corrected some of that uneven line width. One other thing that people will refer to as an error is a lot of people call them jaggies. I'm not certain if there's a more formal name than that, but you can see how as I go through this curve, I have like a chain of 5 pixels and then 2 pixels and then 1. And that's like gradual. That reads as nice. But then I go up to 2 and right down to 1. And that creates this kind of abrupt feeling in it that doesn't feel great. Sometimes I'll go through and fix jaggies depending on like if it feels like it's interrupting the piece I'm working on, if it feels like it isn't fun. But it's never something that I'd like bother someone else about in their art. It's never something that I'd consider an objective flaw. I try to take a pretty loose approach to like the different ways that people can think about how to portray things, the different like stylistic cues people can have. And like as long as you're learning about stuff like that, as long as you're being mindful about what you're including and not including, I think you'll be in a good space. I like, think that in general, the best thing you can do as an artist is to be mindful of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And yeah, in most situations, stuff like jaggies or orphaned pixels, an orphaned pixel as an example is if I have like one sole pixel that isn't with anything else, it will emphasize that detail immensely because it's just this like perfect square off doing its own thing. But as a funny example, like if you want to draw some really compelling eyes, you can actually take advantage of that. I'm gonna just draw a tiny little cat as an example. You can have some really compelling forms if you learn to like embrace stuff that is really eye-catching, that does feel really out of quote-unquote place like that, and start incorporating it into your own style as like an element to be celebrated, as something to be enjoyed. Does that help?
I think it does, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. I'm not quite seeing any other questions rolling in. If any other officers on the call, feel free to correct me. But we might be able to start wrapping up, actually, if you don't have anything else.
Yeah. I know this is silly, but there's a chance that there might be questions on the YouTube stream. Do I have someone watching that as well?
Yeah, I've been watching both streams. I haven't seen anything coming in on the YouTube.
Yeah. All right. I think we'll give them like maybe another minute or so.
Yeah.
See if
sure.
anything rolls in. But like, it's been wonderful like talking for y'all tonight. Like, this is something that is very fun for me. Something that's like legitimately just really nice to mess around with. Something that's always been enjoyable. And like, it's been a pleasure to share this with y'all. I hope this is something that can be like something that brings out the same excitement that I feel for this art form in other people, because it is just really enjoyable to me. And I feel like it's something that like pixel art speaks to a lot of us because of like the types of games we grew up with. But I think even beyond that, there's just something very pleasant to the mindset it gets you thinking in as an artist. I feel like it's evocative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Even Bill is saying that as a non-artist, it's been super informative, and then someone else seconded that, so that's great.
That's really nice.
Yeah, this has been a really cool stream. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess with that, we can pretty much call it a night. I'm not seeing any other questions rolling in.
Absolutely. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. It's like been a great time. Hope y'all have a wonderful night.
Alrighty. Bye, everybody.